The sense of service that we see in the communities we recognize today is something that makes every defense community a special place. Over the past year, I have had the unique opportunity to see firsthand what is important to our families and communities. And I know our families are stronger, our military is stronger, because of the dedication of people and organizations that make our defense communities great. Great communities and strong families build a stronger military. Our readiness depends on communities, families, and the military working together. This is something our next speaker understands, and a recent statement she made resonated with me. We're wearing out our people, and our readiness has gone down, our readiness for all kinds of fights. We've got to restore the readiness of the force. That's job one. As a military spouse, I look towards our military leaders to provide guidance and reassurance. Their understanding matters, and that is why it's a true honor to welcome an individual whose leadership is getting that job done. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to introduce the Secretary of the Air Force, the Honorable Heather Wilson.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be with all of you. I just saw Senator Inhofe out in the hall, and I said I was going to come in here and say, what the senator meant to say. Not that my staff ever did that to me or anything. It's a pleasure to be with you. So the history of military bases in America, it's kind of fascinating on how they came to be and how some of them went away, and they all have their stories. Anyone here know the oldest Air Force base? It's kind of a trick question. Nobody? Nobody wants to risk not knowing the answer in front of everybody else. Anybody here from Wyoming? There we go. F.E. Warren is the oldest continuously active military installation within the Air Force. But the reason it's kind of a trick question is because it was established in 1867 by the United States Army. And it was Fort David Allen Russell before it became F.E. Warren Air Force Base. It was named for a Union general who was killed in the Civil War about an hour and a half west of here. Okay, so how about the home of our first jet? This is not that hard. This is not a trick. Edwards Air Force Base, that is right, in California. But at the time, it was called Muroc Air Force Base, after the little town of Muroc. That town was founded by the Corum family, but because C-O-R-U-M, but because there was already a post office in Corum, Illinois, they just reversed the spelling of the last name, and it became Muroc, the town of Muroc, California, and Muroc Air Force Base. Those dry lake test beds were ideal for testing the first jet airplane and our first rocket-powered supersonic jet that was flown by Chuck Yeager. Broke the sound barrier. Both of those things happened in the 1940s. And in the 1950s, we successfully tested our first hypersonic rocket plane with its 1 million horsepower engine, the forerunner of the ballistic missile program. During World War II, the war had three parts. It had the European theater and the Pacific theater, and what they called at the time the zone of the interior, which for all of us we know as the continental United States. And by 1944, there were nearly 800 air bases, 800 air bases in the zone of the interior, and 750 air bases overseas. That was a tremendous leap from the Army Air Corps of 1939, where they had about 156 air bases. So 156 up to 800. And in 1939, there were about 20,000 people in the Army Air Corps. And by the time we became the United States Air Force, there were 2.4 million airmen. We went from 2,400 airplanes to about 80,000 by the end of the war. And it was an amazing feat of American industry and leadership. We also had depots. We had about 250 depots dotted around the United States with more than 300,000 civilian maintenance employees, many of whom during the war were women. During the war, we actually had 1,200 combat squadrons. The United States has created the most powerful Air Force in the world. And we did that in World War II in less than 5 years. In 1947, the Air Force gained its independence from the Army, and after the war, the Army Air Forces were dwindling. It was a period of retrenchment, of shedding that excess buildup from World War II. And by the end of 1947, only 115 major installations remained in the United States. Only 115. As the Cold War ramped up in the late 1940s, there was a battle that ensued in the Air Force, between the Air Force really and the Congress, over how many bases and groups were actually needed for this independent Air Force. And military leaders at the time argued strongly that future wars we had to expect would start from the air. And the advent of nuclear weapons and the nuclear deterrent compounded the danger that we faced. Stuart Symington was the first Secretary of the Air Force. His portrait hangs outside my office in the Pentagon. And Tooey Spatz was the first Chief of Staff. His portrait is also on the same hallway down next to the Chief of Staff, Dave Goldfein's office. They both fought for an Air Force that was big enough to defend and fight, that was highly trained, technically advanced, and ready, especially in peacetime, with the idea that it was the Air Force that was the halt force. It was the Air Force that the nation would call upon to be there and be ready within days. There was no chance to try to spin up an Air Force to be ready after an attack came. They knew there wouldn't be time to mobilize and train enough pilots and mechanics for day one of conflict in the future. But at the time, the Congress and President Truman didn't budge. They sensed that Americans were tired of war and of military spending. And implementing the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan in Europe required vast amounts of money that was diverted from the military as the military drew down. The relationships between the President and the Secretary of Defense at the time and Congress and the services frayed, and Secretary Symington resigned over that issue. He then went on to become a United States Senator from the state of Missouri. And narrowly lost in 1960, becoming his party's nominee to be President of the United States to another senator whose name was John Kennedy. So I was actually a young officer in Europe during the height of the Cold War. And at the time, as a young officer, every week we would brief our commanding general at that time on the readiness of the wings under the command of that time. The general was in charge of 3rd Air Force, which was based out of RAF Mildenhall in the UK. And so every week they'd throw up the slides. And of course, at that time, it was pre-PowerPoint. And there are enough gray hairs here to remember what it was like pre-PowerPoint, coming in early in the morning with the X-Acto knives on the overhead slides. But we'd see the readiness numbers for the wings under the command of 3rd Air Force. And when I came back to the service to go through the process of getting ready for confirmation, they gave me huge books of PowerPoint slides and reports to go through and try to fill my head with all kinds of facts so I didn't embarrass myself in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee. And when I saw that first slide on readiness, I actually thought that they had the numbers reversed on the columns. I was stunned at the readiness levels that were being reported for the Air Force. 27 years of continuous combat operations, coupled with more than 20 years of drawdown and then sequester and continuing resolutions, has taken a toll on our Air Force readiness and our modernization. Since last year's conference, we have had a number of things that have happened since I was here last year with you. Probably the most important one is the publication of a new national defense strategy. That strategy recognizes the reemergence of great power competition and explicitly turns toward that threat. For the last 27 years, the Air Force and the other services have been focused on combating violent extremism, which is a very different problem to prepare yourself for. But we face today a more competitive and dangerous international security environment than we have seen in decades. China is rapidly modernizing its military and seeking regional preeminence. Russia aims to restore its national prestige and is willing to use military force and coercion in Europe as well as in the Middle East. The National Defense Strategy prioritizes restoring our readiness to increase the lethality of our force for a high-end fight. It is going to drive Air Force budget and priorities. Our first priority is to restore the readiness of the force to win any fight, anytime. The Air Force has to be there on day one. It's about having enough people for us, first and foremost, to meet the needs of the nation. Fiscal year 18 budget takes us to about 325,000 airmen in uniform. In the fiscal year 19 proposal, the President has proposed to add another 4,700 military members. Most of those are to fill in formations that were stripped away and cannibalized as a result of sequester. But 1,000 of those airmen will be going back into the squadrons to give the squadrons the support and the strength that they need to be ready for the fight. Also in that budget are things that really matter a lot to the readiness of the force, like training ranges and simulators and instructors and competitive airmen to be able to go up and train against near-peer competition. We are maximizing the production of preferred munitions, which means precision munitions for the Air Force. But the reality is that our adversaries are modernizing and innovating faster than we are. And so we have to focus not just on readiness for today's fight, but cost-effective modernization to increase the lethality of the force for the long term. Air Force modernization and modernization across the Defense Department has been underfunded over the last decade, particularly given the looming threats that are emerging. This year's budget for the Air Force funds the purchase of 48 F-35 fighters, a revolutionary capability. We are taking the F-35 into the fight and into the training realm at Nellis, which is kind of where we do our most intense warfare preparation at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. The kill ratio for the F-35 against our best against it is 20-1. 20-1. That's the kind of unfair fight that we want American airmen to have if they have to go into conflict. We're buying the KC-46 tanker. Nothing gets anywhere without the gas stations in the sky. The B-21 is on schedule and on glide path. The TX trainer we will make a decision about this year to replace our aging T-38s. The UH-1 will be replaced by a new helicopter to replace that venerable but aging Vietnam-era helicopter. We've put money in the budget for new wings for the A-10, 4 to start in this year, and then another 10 to 12 for next year, to re-wing the A-10 so the sound of those whining engines can put terror into the hearts of any adversary that chooses to take on the United States of America. With respect to the nuclear deterrent, we also have modernization underway there. Nuclear command and control, the long-range standoff weapon, the Minuteman replacement, B-52 re-engines, all of those things supported by the Nuclear Posture Review, which aligns directly with the National Defense Strategy that we've been asked to implement. What we have is strong alignment from the national security strategy to a national space strategy to a national defense strategy and to the nuclear posture review. With respect to air superiority for all of us, China is the pacing threat and is modernizing faster than Russia. We expect that we will have to develop an integrated family of systems to be able to fly and fight and maintain air superiority where we want it, where we need it, in order to protect the vital national interests of the United States. So, as leaders in your community, what can you do to help us? The fact that you're here tells me two things. First, that you care about the security of the United States of America. And second, that in your community, the bases that are there are important to you. We all understand the economic impact that the Department of Defense has on communities. And I know that, having represented for 10 years Albuquerque, New Mexico, and saw the impact of Kirtland Air Force Base on that community long term. So how can you help? Since conscription ended in 1973, airmen have voluntarily left home to serve. In fact, in the Air Force and the Air Service before it, we've never conscripted anybody. Every American airman has been a volunteer throughout history. We only take volunteers. And today, it's less than 1% of Americans who serve in uniform that volunteer to protect the rest of us. Your community's decision to embrace the airmen and soldiers and sailors and Marines who come to your community, to make them feel welcome, to make them feel part of something bigger than themselves, is important to our men and women in the service. Their success depends upon you and your willingness to care for them. And there are a couple of ways that I would ask you to focus on. When we go out and talk to airmen, when I do town hall meetings with airmen or meet with airmen and their families, I ask them what matters to them. Why is a base a place that they want to go to? What are the factors that matter most? And we actually survey them in addition to doing the more focus group kind of town hall meetings. We ask them directly what matters to them most about where they're assigned. And there were two things that kept coming out of all of those surveys. The Secretary of the Navy and the Secretary of the Army and I, we have breakfast together every 2 weeks. Just the three of us, no staff in the room. Absolutely terrifies everybody in the Pentagon. But we were talking about this and what matters. Because very often when I'm out in communities, and the Secretary of the Navy and the Army is the same way, people say, what can we do? What would help to make this base, whatever base, a base of preference for the United States military? And there are two things that often come up, and they're the same for all of the services. First is the quality of the public schools. An airman is 4 times as likely to have a college degree as someone in the neighborhood in which they're living. 4 times as likely. Education for their children matters to them a lot, and their children move a lot. Having confidence in the public schools and the quality of the public schools in the neighborhood in which they're going to be living around that base matters a great deal to our airmen. The second is one that I think many of you have considered and are familiar with, but it makes a lot of sense. It has to do with reciprocity of licensure for spouses. I was at Hanscom Air Force Base recently up near Boston, and a captain said, ma'am, I just want to thank you for raising this as an issue. 2 years ago, I moved here from Florida, and my wife is a licensed family therapist, and it took her 18 months to get her certification in Massachusetts so that she could practice in Massachusetts. She actually could practice in Massachusetts, but without that licensure, she couldn't bill Medicaid. So nobody would hire her until she got through that licensing process in Massachusetts. It took 18 months. They're probably only there for a 3-year tour, and then they'll move on to another state, and she'll have to go through the same thing. So whether it's teachers or nurses or LPNs or attorneys or CPAs, reciprocity of licensure from your state to other states matters a great deal to our military members. What the Secretary of the Navy and the Secretary of the Army and I did was sign a joint letter to all 50 governors saying, going forward, when we make decision on basing for new missions, or if there is ever another round of base realignment and closure, 2 factors that we will add in. You know, we always consider mission, we consider cost, we consider environmental issues, we consider the availability of people, but we will add into that criteria for selection the quality of the public schools and reciprocity of licensure for family members of our men and women who are stationed there. State of Utah, just got a letter from Utah. It was really good to see. They didn't bother with reciprocity. They went even better. They exempted families of military members from having to get licenses in the state of Utah. They didn't say, because we all know, and I know that your cosmetology licensing board is absolutely adamant that the standards for cutting hair in Colorado are just more stringent than they are in Wyoming. I mean, we all know that we're kind of messing with people's rice bowls a little bit, and that there are 50 different boards and commissions in your state that deal with these things on licensure. And I understand that it's important to everyone involved to maintain high standards. But we also recognize that it's a fairly small exemption we're talking about, really high quality people that you want to move to your community, and that probably if someone is teaching 5th grade in Noster, Missouri, they can master what's required of Tennessee history to be able to teach 5th grade in the state of Tennessee. I think that they can do that. And having your states recognize that so that a family member of a military member can be able to get a job shortly after they arrive is a very big deal. So we just decided we're going to be explicit, and we're going to do it all 3 services together, that we will include those as factors in determination of basing decisions, and be transparent about it. The final thing I would say is that there are sometimes things that matter to us that may not be, they may not be the biggest thing on your screen, but they do matter. And because it matters for you all as community leaders to stand up for us when things are controversial. If there is controversy in your community about a low-flying route, or about traffic on the exterior of the base, or about the need for a new gate, or about some water issue that we're addressing and dealing with, and they criticize the Air Force or the Army or the Navy or the Marine Corps, that's when it matters that local people stand up. So it's not us against the community which we're seeking to serve. But there are leaders in the community who are willing, when you hear that on the call-in radio show in the morning, not wait for the airman to have to pick up and call the phone, because that's not call the radio station, because that's not really our role. And we don't really like to be in that situation. But for you as community leaders to pick up the phone and call and say, you know something? When I hear that jet noise, that's the sound of freedom. And we should be thankful. We should be thankful that men and women are willing to put their lives on the line for us. So thank you. And let's knock it off. Those kinds of things matter tremendously to our airmen who wonder some days whether Do the American people really appreciate what we're trying to do here? I'll tell you one final story that happened just recently. And I was up in South Dakota before I came here, Rapid City, South Dakota. Anybody from South Dakota here? I'm deeply disappointed. Oh, there we go, a couple. So anybody from Ellsworth here? Yes, back here. Okay, hi. Don't you know? So one of the things that Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota, Montana, North Dakota did was work low-flying routes to train the B-1s. This happened over the last 5 years, so I was not involved in it, but it was an issue in the paper, and they worked through all of those issues on noise and other things. Well, this did not actually happen in South Dakota. It was our B-1s out of Texas, probably 3-4 weeks ago now. And they were out training. B-1 with, instructor pilot and a brand new crew. So these are young people, maybe less than a year out of pilot training, less than 2 years out of college. This is a young crew. And they're out training, and the indicator lights goes off that they have a fire in the wing. This is not a good thing. They go through their checklist on everything you're supposed to do. If you get an indication of a fire, a wing is where the fuel is, those who don't know. Fire in a wing is not a good day. They go through their checklist, and they do everything they're supposed to do, and they still have an indication that they've got a fire. The next thing on the checklist is to eject from the airplane. You don't eject from the B-1 all at once. You go out, one crew member goes out before the others. There's a sequence that you go through so you don't hit everybody on the way out. And so they started the ejection sequence. As you can imagine, this is a pretty tense time. To eject from an aircraft anyway is a very high-risk thing. So the first crew member pulls the handles to eject. The cover comes off above the ejection sheet, and nothing else happens. The seat doesn't fire. Within 2 seconds of knowing that that had happened, the aircraft commander said, "Cease ejection. We'll try to land it." Imagine two things. First, the airman who is sitting on an ejection seat where he has pulled the fire pins and sits there for the next 25 minutes wondering whether it's like pulling out the pin on a grenade and holding it as you come in to land, and not knowing whether the next piece of turbulence is going to cause you to launch. The second is the courage it took and the values represented by that aircraft commander who decided we're going to try for all of us to make it rather than sacrifice the one guy who can't get out. Those are the men and women who choose to wear the uniform of the United States Air Force. And I am proud to serve with them every single day. Thank you all for your support, and God bless you all.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've had all kinds of great speakers this afternoon, but I have to tell you that that was a really special message. Let's give Secretary Heather Wilson another big round of applause. I know we certainly appreciate her message to us, and more importantly, the leadership she's showing in advancing issues important to the Air Force, not only the Air Force, but all military services. She recognizes the importance of what communities are doing today, and also she appreciates the challenges for us doing more, and that challenge is so important, I think. Strong communities and strong bases can only be preserved through a commitment to exceed what has been done in the past. This is our challenge and an opportunity to meet this challenge Requires all of us to learn from each other and collectively raise the bar on what it means to be a great community. Secretary Wilson's comments certainly underscored that. The 5 communities we recognize today, plus the 18 over the past few years, offer a wealth of stories and ideas that are available for you, all of you who are attending today, to innovate and to advance to the next level. Through the magazine, which you have seen, the great video we just shared, and the coming discussion, we hope that there is at least one great idea you'll take back home to share in your community. That's a really important do-out from this session. We've seen all this happen all across the country, and it is what makes this program truly unique and impactful. None of this would be possible, though, without the generous support of our program partner and the official sponsor of America's great defense communities, USAA. To continue our discussion this afternoon, I'm very pleased to welcome USAA's Assistant Vice President of Military Advocacy and a true champion of all defense communities, I introduce Mike Kelly. Mike?
All right, I'm going to share with you one of those stories, something that highlights the importance of community and taking care of one another. It's about a Navy service member and his family. 18 years in the Navy. He moves to California with 30 days' notice. I've never done that. 25 years in the military, I never got 30 days' notice. I can't imagine what that would be like. But despite the military's support, the family struggled financially. The sailor received authorization to work a second job because his wife, a mental health counselor, had trouble finding work until she took a $600 class to become licensed in California, the very issue that the Secretary of the Air Force just spoke of, and a very important issue at the state level. So this family was in crisis and on the brink of losing their home. They then connected with a nonprofit program in San Diego called STEP, Support the Enlisted Project. Through financial assistance and counseling, this family got back on their feet. The spouse was able to return to her profession, and they are on the path to financial self-sufficiency. Imagine how much easier it would have been if she wouldn't even had to go through that licensing process. And unfortunately, this is a story that is repeated far too frequently. We all know military life can be tough, and financial challenges are at the top of that list. In fact, it's something that we're committed to at USAA, something we're passionate about, and something that we live every day through our educational foundation that focuses on financial readiness and training. So we know that balancing that military life, that military service with everyday challenges of having a family can be very hard to manage, and this is especially true for our young enlisted service members. This is a family issue, it's a military readiness issue, and it is a community issue, all key themes that we've already heard this afternoon. And that is why when people, organizations, and communities come together and step up to support our military family members, it matters and it has impact, what I like to call collective impact, that we're stronger together and we can deliver more impact when we work together as communities. So these communities and organizations and people highlighted in this year's Great American Defense Communities Award Program, and wasn't that a great video? So excited to see so many communities coming together to support our military. So this shows the true meaning, and programs like STEP, Support the Enlisted program, is so important. It depends on the strength of the communities so that we can continue to support the military. So joining me today are four individuals, that understand what service in action means, representatives from the communities recognized this year. Our goal is to learn from them and to create great communities around the country. So please help me welcome to the stage Major General Randy Taylor, Commanding General of U.S. Army Communications Electronic Command and Senior Commander at Aberdeen Proving Grounds. We heard Noster, the Secretary was talking about Noster, Missouri. We've got Dr. Jerrod Wheeler, the Superintendent of Noster Public Schools located near Whiteman Air Force Base. He's showing how partnerships can improve the quality of education. Again, another important topic that we've already heard about today. Tony Teravainen, the founder and leader of STEP, that program that we just heard about. He's helping servicemen and women deal with financial issues and helping them during times of need. And then finally, a face that's familiar to ADC and a very good friend of mine, Kathy Roth-Douquet, CEO of Blue Star Families. All right, this is fun. I always wanted to be a talk show host, so this is a great experience. All right, well, thank you all for being here. Tony, I want to start with you, if I could, please. That story that I just shared about one of your clients, it really demonstrates the stress that our military families face when they get into those financial difficulties. Tell us about how your particular program is trying to change this.
Well, the simple answer is we're doing as much as we can. At Support the Enlisted Project, our focus is clear. We work with young military and transitioning veteran families in a financial crisis. We work to get them towards financial self-sufficiency. So when I talk about crisis, I'm talking about military families that come to us with a piece of paper that says eviction, repossession, disconnection. They have food through breakfast tomorrow. They're out of diapers, these types of issues. So I understand the hardships that families face. I grew up in a military family. I grew up on SAC Air Force bases in the 70s and 80s, drinking the water. I'm a submarine sailor, so I lived it from that perspective. So I understand what families go through, I understand the hardships, I understand the stresses, but I also understand the focus that needs to happen. And I understand that it's a dangerous job protecting this country, but it's also a dangerous job training to protect this country. So every time we ask our service members to go out and perform those duties, they have to be on their game. They have to be highly focused. So at STEP, we'll assist about 900 families a year in Southern California. These families come to us in this financial crisis, and we work with them. We get them individually on a path to financial self-sufficiency. And we're going to do this through a process of 3 ways. The first one is a counseling program that we'll put those families into. And what we found that works very well is instead of using a financial expert or a banker that's trying to conduct some social work and help somebody solve a family problem, we take a social worker who's trained on doing short-term interventions, get them certified in financial counseling, and have that person provide the leadership to empower the family to help them get through the process. It's a step-by-step process, and it'll average about 15 hours of counseling over a week or 2. And each of these families now understand how to use their strengths, and they solve their own problem. We'll back that up with a grant. So at the end of the day, the financial crisis is still pending. So if we can't figure out how to use their future dollars to stop today's loss, then we go ahead and write the check to their creditor. So we'll pay to stop the eviction, we'll pay to stop the repossession, turn their car insurance back on, these types of things. The third piece is really using the community. We have a very small piece of the service that we perform, helping families in crisis move to self-sufficiency. We know that our families need a lot of other services. So in our community, we're going to work with all the other members out there. If you look at where our families come from, it's really illustrated. We'll see that 95% of the families that come to STEP will come from a personal referral from another agency, 65% of those being on the basis, inside the wire. So friends, family, coworker, military supervisor, or other financial support agencies on base. And then the other 35 are from 131 different agencies around town. So that ranges between colleges, churches, large nonprofits, small nonprofits. It's really a mix, but we've really tried to work ourselves into the community and become part of that fabric. It's an intense work. It's an intense job. It's a lot of work. But managing these families, we're talking 60 to 80 families a month. This month, we'll stop our 400th eviction for an active duty or transitioning veteran family. We've granted almost $1.5 million in grants. And in doing that, we're able to achieve over a 90% success rate. And 92% of the families that receive money on our behalf don't come back for more service. So we can alleviate that stress completely from the family. We can lower that overall stress threshold. We can let the service members focus back on their jobs, so when they do go to work, they don't have the stress at home. What they have is their job in front of them, and they can completely perform that with their whole focus.
Wow. To focus on the mission. That is great. And just hearing the number of nonprofits and helping organizations in San Diego, I'm sure some of the smaller military communities, like Ellsworth Air Force Base, probably not that many, but would you consider or say that working together, you're actually making each other stronger because you're able to focus on the crisis, the financial crisis piece, and someone who works on housing is focused on housing?
Yeah, that's a good point. We can focus specifically in our area, right? So we can all be experts, but everybody doesn't have to be a jack of all trades. You can be the expert and you just have to know the other experts. It's a referral basis. A lot of times I'm on the phone, or one of my program managers or directors is on the phone with other service providers, negotiating, if you do this, we can do this, if you do this, or I've got this person, doesn't quite fit, but I can do this. So it's definitely a community support.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your work in that space. Let's switch to education now. We heard Secretary Wilson talking about the two most important things, right? The first was, what's the public school like in that particular area? So, Dr. Wheeler, 2/3 of the students in your district are military connected, and we heard Secretary Wilson talk about that importance of quality education. From your very tactical perspective, in Knob Noster, Missouri, how do we get there? How do we actually address those issues of quality public education?
Great question, and it's my pleasure to be here and kind of tell our story of what we've done. The comments from Secretary Wilson are almost congruent with the same comments that I heard from General Paul Tibbets, our base commander, 3 years ago when I stepped into the role of superintendent at Knob Noster. And it was a readiness piece, but it was also a retention piece for our airmen. One of the most important things that was resonating in feedback was the quality of the public K-12 education. When our airmen are out taking care of the business of our country, the last thing that needs to be on their mind is whether or not their children are getting a high-quality education back home in a safe environment. So we went about a process of realigning our academic programming into a more STEM-rich type of setting. We really took a pretty aggressive approach. We partnered with National Math Science Initiative to bring in a very robust STEM-based academic program with advanced placement. AP courses are among the most rigorous in the country, and we felt like it would elevate opportunities and expectations for our students. So brought in the AP program. We partnered with First Robotics to bring in a very aggressive robotics program in our high school. And if you haven't seen First Robotics, I have to tell you it's pretty exciting. And the interesting thing about that program is, unlike football and basketball and baseball, about 60+% of the students that are engaged in First Robotics go on to have a pro career in a STEM-based college or career track. So as far as investment, it's a very good way to invest our money and put those opportunities in front of our students. Along with the STEM programming, as is listed in the mission of Knob Noster Public Schools, we have refocused and redoubled our efforts to embed quality character education, citizenship, and patriotism as some of our founding components. We know that when we look ahead to our democracy, we have to have students that are ready to go out and make a positive impact in the United States of America and beyond. So that was step 3. Our most recent steps are partnering with Edmentum, one of our sponsors here for this great event, to bring an online Ed Options Academy program, which will allow blended and virtual learning for not just our enrolled students, but we're outreaching to homeschooled students to give them opportunities to engage with us, as well as those PCSing students. Maybe they're delayed coming in or leaving our district, but they can enroll in that blended or online program and have uninterrupted learning throughout those steps. And then the last piece, again, with Edmentum, we've offered some technology-driven, prescriptive teaching opportunities to get our middle school students ready to jump into those rigorous courses. And I will say that when you put elevated expectations in front of students, at least for our students, they responded. In year 1, our students had the highest number of enrollments in advanced placement and they had the highest number of qualifying scores in advanced placement across all of Global Strike. So we were happy about that. And then likewise on the robotics side, our students received Rookie Team of the Year honors, as well as ended up in globals both years. So that's just a little bit of our story and what we're doing to try to bring those opportunities to our students.
This is focused 9th through 12th grades?
9 through 12, we've pushed that down into middle school, and then I'd be remiss not to thank our partners over at Department of Defense Education Activities for some grant money, and we're looking to push that now down into our elementary grades next year. So that's our story, and as one of about 30 heavily impacted districts in our country, we feel like we not only have the obligation to educate our students, but we also need to, with that population density of military students, we have to set an example for others. There are tons of military-connected districts that don't have that population density, and we feel like we need to set an example so that they can say, okay, this is what it looks like to specialize in the education of a military student.
That's great. Hopefully you're taking ideas away. I mean, that's the whole purpose of this panel, is to learn from communities that have really had great programs in place. So General Taylor, let's switch to you. Wearing the uniform and commanding primarily a civilian workforce, right? Not a whole lot of Army up there. You have a different perspective on how important the community is. And we saw the connections with the generations of civilian employees who were continuing to give back. In your community, tell us about how that commitment has extended across those generations and how you're engaging them to give back and make the future brighter for others.
Yeah, good question. I hear a theme developing here about public schools and the importance of education in our communities and how the military can really help with that. So let me tell you what we're doing at Aberdeen Proving Ground. If you don't know where that is, it's up in northeast Maryland on the Chesapeake Bay, 144 miles of shoreline on the Chesapeake Bay. And so at the top of the list there behind us at the Great American Defense Community, you see the Chesapeake Science and Security Corridor, and that's where I currently command right now, Aberdeen Proving Ground. And what each of our installations need to do is find the nexus between our capabilities that we have on our bases and the needs or the interests of the community that we serve. And I'm very fortunate at Aberdeen Proving Ground, where we have 28,000 people that live, work, or retire there, that 10,000 of them are scientists and engineers. And of those, 3,000 are PhDs or others with advanced credentials. So this nexus, this intersection between what we can offer and what the community needs is very clear, and it's with regard to the schools and the children. And so where we jump in and do a great job, I'll give you some numbers for just 1 year, last year, 2017. If I told you we had 1,000 STEM interactions between our staff, our workforce at APG and the community, that would be a lot. If I told you 5,000, that would be pretty good. If I told you 10,000 in the year, that would be amazing. I actually had 40,000 student interactions between the experts that work at APG and our surrounding schools. And that's great. That includes 1,300 teacher interactions. And that's spread out over 90 events we have in the course of the year. So one military installation, 90 STEM events with the surrounding community. Some of those events are on post, on the installation, some are off the installation. And they vary. We have different programs, different durations. One called GEMS, Gains in Science, and Gains in Education of Math and Science, so that's basically middle and high school age children engagements. Again, we do this all grades, all ages. Another one, RISE, stands for Real World Internship in Science and Engineering, where we have paid internships for 11th and 12th graders, where they actually come on APG and work for a week or two, get paid, work in our laboratories with our scientists, and then go about the rest of their summer. So those programs are kind of the tip of the iceberg. We have other things like Lego League competitions, a lot of fun if you've been around any one of those. Solar vehicle building competitions, great work that goes into that, and career shadowing days, all just events sprinkled throughout the year. And then our scientists take it a step further. We've helped establish a STEM curriculum at our local high school just outside the gates there. And that particular program is now matured where they're matriculating 50 students a year out of this STEM program that's very specific there. And then we go even with our community college and help create the cyber and STEM programs there, and seen as the regional expertise in this regard. So that's where we're finding this nexus, and this becomes so important not just to serve the present needs of the community, but to really look at how we grow our future workforce. You know, whenever you're hiring a workforce of 28,000, you got to strike the right balance of insourcing and outsourcing and local talent. And we've learned that the more that we recruit and hire locally from like local universities, they tend to stick around a long time because they have ties. And so our attrition rate stays low. But again, it's all about the balance. And in the STEM and what we're doing in the Army and where we know the future is taking us, it's so important when you look at things like robotics and autonomous systems and AI to really develop this kind of future generation.
That is excellent. 40,000.
40,000.
Interactions. Amazing. All right, well, let's switch. We're going to wrap it up here in just a moment. But Kathy, welcome back. Thanks for being here. Now, you have a unique perspective because you see this broadly across the great work that Blue Star Families does with their annual military lifestyle survey. Something, it's now 10 years old, right? Next year, 10 So great longitudinal data that we have from that shows the impact on our military families. So you've got some new data from this year's survey. Can you share with us what you're seeing at the national level that could be applied locally, and what does it mean for people in this room?
Thank you for USAA's great support. You're our primary supporter for this survey and have been for the last 5 years. This is exactly the right room for us. The great American defense communities and all of you who care about the military families in your communities make all the difference in the world to the currently serving military and their families, active duty guard and reserve. And our survey shows this year that you guys are more important than ever. So this is the right room for me to be in, and I appreciate the fact that you care enough to be here. The survey's been around since 2009. Blue Star Families has been around since 2009. We were started by military families who felt that while we loved the national security mission, we were starting to feel that many years into the long war, military family life was perhaps getting to be too difficult, and there were perhaps ways that we could improve it. But the families themselves needed a seat at the table to share our insights, to share our ideas about what the solutions would be. When we started Blue Star Families, we wanted data. We didn't just want our own anecdotes, our own experience of the challenges, but we wanted some ground truth. So the survey's purpose is to listen to what's going on in real time. We do it every year because actually every year what it means to be in the military changes. Someone who got out 5 years ago or 10 years ago doesn't have the experience of today's military. It's an important experience, but we have to always hear what's going on now. So it's to listen, it's to share that with the populations that need to know about it, and it's to solve the problems, to work on partnerships ourselves or to help other people to do that solution. It's the largest and most comprehensive survey of its kind. It's larger than the DoD surveys. This last year, 2017, over 8,000 people took the survey. This current year that we'll be releasing next, we had 10,000. That compares to between 2,000 and 4,000 from DoD's every third year survey. 5 top trends from this last year's survey to take away. I think one of the top ones is that for the first time ever, concerns about family separation became the #1 concern for both service members and for military spouses. Unseated pay and benefits is the #1 concern. And so I think that's pretty significant. We saw that a significant number of military families have had more than 4 years of family separation since 9/11. More than 40% have had more than 6 months of separation in the last year and a half. And I'm not just talking about special operators here. This is our force as a whole. So we're experiencing a lot of separation, and that's having a toll. Not only because of this separation, but because the nature of our military changes every year. Our military is more female than ever, and will continue to be so, and it's more millennial than ever. And so that's part of people's interpretation of their experience. That's #1. #2 is the current operational tempo is unacceptable, creates an unacceptable level of stress. A lot of that has to do with sequestration. Maybe getting a budget will make a difference. But part of the stress level there is also because of the lack of support that the family feels for that operational tempo. #3, concerns about the effect on dependent children are increasing. Education being #1 in terms of people's concern for their children. So we've seen that. Only 33% of our respondents said that they felt their local schools were good or excellent in helping their children deal with the unique stresses of military life, specifically deployment and moves. 33%. So I heard the Air Force Secretary said that that's going to be a consideration for BRAC. I think that's a real opportunity for communities to look at that issue. Child care continues to be a top need. 2/3 of military families don't have the child care they need. That includes female service members, so that's a real readiness issue. And finally, the overall concern of the impact of military service on the family is a top 5 driver, especially for those who are planning on leaving military service in the next 2 years for reasons other than retirement. So the people who are saying, I can't continue to serve, are saying that because of their concern about the impact of service on their family. What does that mean? We have a member who was stationed in, her husband was stationed in Chicago. He was away on a submarine. She was pregnant. She found out she had cancer. So she had to manage her cancer treatment and make those decisions while her husband was inaccessible. And then they had orders to Washington, D.C. So she had to lose her health care network, take her newborn, be without her husband, and try to reintegrate. She was not moving to an installation. Fortunately, she was referred to our Blue Star Family chapter, and we were able to help integrate her into a fellowship community that helped her navigate her needs and find a community and find health care. But in the absence of that, for her husband, the toll on his family for his service was so high that he otherwise would not have been able to continue serving. So this is why family resilience and family integration is all about readiness, all about retention, and also about recruitment. So those are our top trends. Our number one top finding is that increasing civilian and military community level connections to improve local integration is incredibly key for military family health, but also for national security readiness. And I think my last example expresses that. Most military live off installation. Most military are married and or have children. 80% of people who are serving beyond one tour of duty, and we have a professional military, so that's a lot of us. They are either married and have children. They're in the communities. They don't feel they belong there. They would like to feel that they belong there. 2/3 have been there for less than 2 years. It's not because there aren't these wonderful programs, but when you're moving as often as you are and you don't have that conventional knowledge of the situation, the friction can be too high to make those relationships. It's one of the kinds of things that Blue Star Families tries to do to help. So, top takeaway is that the DoD can do a number of things to update their policies for what constitutes today's military and their family and change personnel policies. But I think even more important, military service organizations such as mine, sorry about that, and local community organizations such as yours can do a tremendous amount to make a difference. I am so proud that we get to work with Association of Defense Communities on that. I think it's extremely promising, but this is our opportunity.
Absolutely. So reassuring to know that we've got folks like Blue Star Families working on the research and identifying the issues, and already teams like these communities that are recognized this year that are addressing those issues, right? So we're going to close here. I do want to thank you all for sharing your stories. Incredible work that's being done. I'm still amazed at the 40,000 interactions there with the STEM. Great programs. Thank you all for the hard work that you're doing and the incredible value of services and support that you're providing to our military families. So, I have to make an announcement now about what is next. So, you have these in your kits, and this is the Great American Defense Communities Celebration that we're going to roll to next. I believe the doors are going to open up on the left side. Yep, I see a hand waving back there. And we're going to roll into a reception tonight with food and drink from the regions and the communities that were recognized this year. Just behind that wall, the ADC team will direct you back there, and you're going to be able to register for some great prizes and some really good food. And I heard there was some bourbon back there too. Kentucky is a winner this year, so any bourbon lovers, come on and join us. Thank you all for your attention and for being with us this afternoon.